In a pristine suburban dining room, a 22-year-old college graduate was about to face their family's ultimate test. What started as a celebratory homecoming dinner took a shocking turn when they came face to face with a peanut butter sandwich on a paper plate, while everyone else received perfectly plated ribeye steaks. Riley Morrison wasn't your typical returning college student. For 2 years, they had spent their life rebuilding themselves through therapy and independence. Known for their hard-won emotional resilience and determination to break generational cycles. When they encountered their mother's deliberate humiliation, disguised as a lesson, they had no idea they were walking into the most honest conversation their family had ever shared. Riley's decision to stay at the table instead of fleeing would lead to revelations that would shatter every family member's carefully constructed facade. What began as a cruel reminder of their outsider status would become a night of raw vulnerability and potential healing. The Morrison family would never be the same after discovering that love without conditions might actually be possible, if they could find the courage to tear down the walls they'd built around their hearts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Morrison house sat exactly where Riley remembered it. A 2-story colonial with cream siding and forest green shutters, nestled behind the perfectly manicured lawn their mother had always insisted upon. Even the seasonal flower arrangement by the front door looked identical to 2 years ago, as if time had simply paused while Riley rebuilt their life from the ground up. Standing at the end of the driveway, Riley felt their chest tighten, the weight of their overnight bag pressed against their shoulder, containing carefully chosen clothes that struck the right balance between respectability and authenticity, a skill they'd learned in therapy. Dr. Kim's voice echoed in their mind. You can't control their reactions, Riley. You can only control your own responses. The front door opened before they reached it. Riley! Their mother's voice carried that particular pitch she reserved for performances. Bright, controlled, projecting just the right amount of maternal warmth for any neighbors who might be watching. Margaret Morrison stepped onto the porch wearing her signature beige slacks and cream blouse, her hair styled in the same shoulder-length bob she'd maintained for as long as Riley could remember. At 48, she still moved with the efficient precision of someone who had built her entire identity around being in control. Hi, Mom. Riley's voice came out smaller than intended, and they immediately hated themselves for it. 2 years of growth, therapy, independence, and within seconds, they were 20 years old again, deflated by their mother's carefully modulated enthusiasm. Maggie's embrace was brief and calculated, her perfume, still the same floral scent, overwhelming in its familiarity. You look. She paused, her eyes taking inventory. Different. Riley had cut their hair shorter, traded the clothes their mother had always criticized for a style that felt authentic. They'd gained weight in therapy. Healthy weight, Dr. Kim assured them, filling out the hollow spaces that years of anxiety and irregular eating had carved. I feel different. Well? Maggie's smile never wavered, but something cooled in her eyes. Come in. Everyone's waiting. The interior of the house felt like stepping into a time capsule. Same cream walls, same family photos in identical frames, same subtle scent of vanilla candles that Maggie lit religiously. Riley's high school graduation photo still hung in the hallway, a reminder of who they used to be, or perhaps who their mother thought they should have remained. Their father appeared from the kitchen, work shirt wrinkled from his commute, tie loosened but not removed. David Morrison had always looked tired, but the lines around his eyes seemed deeper now. His smile, unlike Maggie's, reached his eyes when he saw Riley. There's my kid. His hug was genuine, lasting a beat longer than their mother's, and Riley felt some of the tension in their chest ease. Good to have you home. Good to be here, Riley said, and meant it partially. Riley! Jessica emerged from the living room, textbook in hand. At 19, she'd grown into the graceful beauty their mother had always predicted, her pre-med studies evident in her posture. Straight-backed, purposeful, perfect. Her hug was warm but brief, and Riley caught something flickering across her face. Stress, maybe, or fear. Tom appeared last, sliding down the banister with the fluid grace of a 16-year-old who'd perfected the movement. His dark hair fell across his eyes, And when he looked at Riley, something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Relief. His hug was fierce and quick. "Tom's been asking when you'd visit for months," Maggie said, her tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. "Have you?" Riley looked at their youngest sibling, who shrugged with studied nonchalance. "Maybe." Maggie clapped her hands together. "Well, we should eat. I've prepared something special for Riley's homecoming." The dining room had been set like a magazine spread. The good china, inherited from David's grandmother and reserved for holidays and important guests, gleamed under the chandelier. Crystal glasses caught the light, and cloth napkins were folded into perfect triangles. Beside each plate, 5 place settings, each positioned with ruler precision. Riley's throat tightened. This level of formality wasn't celebration. It was theater. "Sit. Sit." Maggie gestured toward the table with the practiced authority of a hostess who'd orchestrated countless dinner parties. "Riley, you're there." She pointed to the chair at David's right hand, the same seat Riley had occupied throughout childhood, though it felt foreign now. David uncorked a bottle of wine with more ceremony than necessary. "To having the family together again," he said, filling glasses for the adults. Jessica got sparkling cider. Tom got regular. The same hierarchy they'd always maintained. Maggie disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a serving tray that made Riley's stomach clench with anticipation. The smell of perfectly cooked beef filled the room. Expensive, rich, celebratory. She began placing plates with theatrical precision. David received his ribeye first, seasoned and grilled to perfection, accompanied by roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. The presentation was restaurant quality. Jessica's plate came next, identical to her father's, the steak still steaming. Tom's portion was slightly smaller, but equally elegant. Maggie served herself last, setting down her plate with a satisfied smile. Riley waited. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. 4 family members with beautiful meals, Riley with an empty place setting. Then Maggie returned from the kitchen one final time. She placed a paper plate in front of Riley. On it sat a peanut butter sandwich, 2 pieces of white bread with the crusts cut off, a thin layer of peanut butter visible at the edges. A plastic knife rested beside it, the kind from fast food restaurants. The room fell into a silence so complete that Riley could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. David's uncomfortable clearing of his throat. Jessica's sharp intake of breath. Riley stared at the paper plate. The sandwich looked exactly like the ones their mother had packed for their school lunches when money was tighter, before David's promotion, before Jessica started winning academic awards, before the family had money for ribeye steaks. Their hands remained folded in their lap. Every instinct screamed to flee, to grab their bag from the hallway and drive back to their apartment, back to Alex's understanding friendship, back to Dr. Kim's office where their feelings were validated instead of dismissed. But they didn't move. 2 years of therapy had taught them to breathe through moments like this, to observe their emotional response without being consumed by it, to recognize manipulation without immediately reacting to it. So Riley sat perfectly still, staring at the peanut butter sandwich while their family ate ribeye and tried to understand what they were really being served. It wasn't just food, it was a message. The grandfather clock continued its relentless ticking as Riley stared at the peanut butter sandwich. Around the table, the sound of silverware against china created a discordant symphony. The careful cutting of expensive beef, the soft scrape of forks against plates, the deliberate chewing that seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. Riley's hands remained folded in their lap, knuckles white with the effort of maintaining control. Dr. Kim's voice whispered through their mind. "When you feel overwhelmed, ground yourself. 5 things you can see, 4 you can hear, 3 you can touch." The exercise had saved them countless times during panic attacks, and they employed it now. See? The paper plate, stark white against the mahogany table, the crystal wine glasses refracting light into tiny rainbows. Jessica's fingers trembling slightly as she cut her steak. Tom's eyes, dark and knowing, watching Riley with careful attention. Their mother's satisfied expression as she chewed, as if the evening was proceeding exactly as planned. Here, the clock, the silverware. David's uncomfortable throat clearing that had become more frequent. Their own heartbeat, thunderous in their ears. Touch. The smooth fabric of their jeans against their palms. The solid weight of the chair beneath them. The cool air from the air conditioning raising goosebumps on their arms. The exercise worked. The words hung in the air like a carefully lobbed grenade. Riley recognized the subtext. Their social work degree was impractical. Their choices were disappointing. Their life needed correction. "I start at the County Family Services office in 2 weeks," Riley said, their voice steadier than they felt. "I'll be working with families in crisis, helping connect them with resources." Maggie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "The county? But the pay must be." "It's enough," Riley said simply. "For now, maybe. But long-term, you'll want something with better prospects. David knows people in corporate. I like what I'm doing." The words came out sharper than Riley intended, and they watched their mother's expression shift almost imperceptibly. Maggie's smile remained in place, but her eyes hardened. "Of course, dear. But liking something and making a living at it are two different things. We just want you to be successful." Riley felt the familiar trap closing around them. The way their mother could make concerns sound like love while delivering criticism like surgical strikes. But 2 years of distance had given them perspective on these conversations. They could see the pattern now, the way Maggie redefined success to exclude anything Riley actually wanted. "I am successful," Riley said quietly. "I graduated summa cum laude. I've been financially independent for 4 years. I'm starting a career helping people." "Helping people is admirable," David interjected, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying to mediate without taking sides. "That's important work." Maggie shot him a look that could have cut glass. "Of course it's important, but importance doesn't pay student loans." "I don't have student loans," Riley said. "I worked my way through school." The silence that followed felt different from the earlier one. This wasn't shock. It was the recognition that Riley had changed in ways that made them harder to control. They'd become self-sufficient, independent, adult. Everything their parents claimed to want, but delivered in a package they didn't recognize. Jessica finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. That's really impressive, Riley. Working and going to school full-time must have been exhausting." Riley looked at their sister, catching something vulnerable in her expression. Jessica understood pressure, the weight of expectations, the exhaustion of trying to be perfect. For a moment, Riley saw past the golden child facade to the 19-year-old, struggling beneath it. "It was hard," Riley admitted, "but worth it." Tom had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now he set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Can I ask something?" His voice carried an edge that made everyone turn to look at him. "Why did Riley get a sandwich?" The question landed like a physical blow. David's face flushed red. Jessica's eyes went wide. Maggie's mask of composure slipped for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Tom," David said in his warning voice. "No, seriously." Tom's 16-year-old fearlessness was on full display. "Everyone else gets steak. Riley gets a peanut butter sandwich on a paper plate. Why?" Maggie straightened in her chair, her voice taking on the lecturing tone Riley remembered from childhood punishments. "Sometimes people need to be reminded of where they came from, of what things cost. Riley has been away for 2 years without so much as a phone call on holidays." "That's not true," Riley interrupted, their calm finally cracking. "I called on Christmas. You hung up on me when I wouldn't promise to come home and get my priorities straight. You were being disrespectful. I was being honest." Riley's voice rose slightly and they forced themselves to breathe before continuing. "I told you I was happy. I told you about school, about my internship, about the life I was building, and you said it wasn't good enough." Maggie's face flushed. "We sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. Your father worked 60-hour weeks so you children could have better lives than we did. And you threw it all away to play social worker for people who won't appreciate it." "I didn't throw anything away." Riley's therapy training kicked in, and they lowered their voice, speaking with deliberate calm. "I used the opportunities you gave me to become who I'm supposed to be." Who you're supposed to be. Maggie's laugh was bitter. A bleeding heart making $30,000 a year, living in some tiny apartment. Stop! The word came out like a command, surprising everyone, including Riley. Just stop! The room fell silent again. But this time the silence belonged to Riley. They had claimed it, owned it, filled it with their presence instead of shrinking into it. Riley looked around the table, at their father's guilty discomfort, their mother's defensive anger, Jessica's wide-eyed recognition, Tom's fierce pride. They thought about fleeing, about grabbing their bag and driving back to their real life. It would be so easy. It's what they would have done at 18, at 20. Run from the confrontation, from the hurt, from the impossible task of making these people understand who they'd become. But they weren't 18 anymore. Slowly, deliberately, Riley picked up the plastic knife and cut the peanut butter sandwich in half. The bread compressed under the dull blade, peanut butter squeezing out the sides. They took a bite. It tasted like childhood, like packed lunches and hand-me-down clothes and their mother's lectures about being grateful. Like all the times they'd felt small and wrong and hungry for something they couldn't name. But it also tasted like survival, like the sandwiches they'd eaten during college when money was tight, when they'd chosen groceries over textbooks, when they'd learned that being hungry for a meal was different from being hungry for approval. Riley swallowed and looked directly at their mother. "Thank you for dinner." The response clearly wasn't what Maggie had expected. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "I know what this is," Riley continued, taking another bite of the sandwich. "I know what you're trying to teach me, but I already learned it. I learned it when I was 18 and scared and had to figure out how to take care of myself. I learned it when I worked 3 jobs to pay for school. I learned it every time I chose to keep going instead of coming home." They paused, meeting each family member's eyes in turn. "I'm not the same person who left 2 years ago. And this," they gestured to the paper plate, "doesn't make me feel ashamed anymore. It makes me proud, because I know I can survive on peanut butter sandwiches, if I have to, but I also know I don't have to." Riley took another bite, chewing slowly, deliberately. Around the table, their family sat frozen, watching this person they no longer recognized claim space they'd never been given. "Now," Riley said, wiping their hands on the cloth napkin with careful dignity, "who wants to tell me what's really going on here?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Riley's challenge, direct, unflinching, had shifted something fundamental in the room's dynamic. For the first time since they'd walked through the front door, they weren't the one being interrogated. Maggie's fingers tightened around her wine glass, her knuckles pale against the crystal. "I think we all know what this is about, Riley. Your little performance online." Riley's stomach clenched. They'd known this moment would come eventually, but the timing felt calculated to inflict maximum damage. "My social media posts." "Your public humiliation of this family," Maggie corrected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Did you think we wouldn't see them? Did you think your father and I don't know how to use the internet?" David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fork pushing asparagus around his plate in nervous patterns. "Maggie, maybe we should—" "No." The word cracked like a whip. "She wants honesty. She'll get it." Maggie turned back to Riley, her composure finally cracking to reveal the hurt underneath. 3 months ago, Jessica showed me your Instagram, your Facebook posts, your Twitter rants about toxic families and breaking free from generational trauma." Jessica's face went white. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "You shared articles about narcissistic parents. You posted quotes about chosen family, being more important than blood family. You talked about us, Riley. You made us into villains for strangers to judge." Riley felt heat rising in their chest, the familiar cocktail of shame and anger that their mother had always been so skilled at brewing. But Dr. Kim's voice cut through the emotional static. "Your feelings are valid. Your experiences are real. You don't owe anyone silence about your own life." "I never mentioned any of you by name," Riley said slowly. "You didn't have to!" Maggie's voice cracked with genuine pain. Your friends know who your family is, your classmates, that Alex person who likes every single one of your posts about how much better your life is without us. The mention of Alex felt like a violation, as if Maggie had somehow contaminated the one pure relationship in Riley's life by dragging it into this toxic space. Those posts weren't about you, Riley said. But even as the words left their mouth, they knew how hollow they sounded. They were about me, about my healing process, about patterns I was recognizing in therapy. Therapy. Maggie spat the word like it tasted bitter. Of course. Let me guess. Everything wrong in your life is our fault. Your therapist told you we were abusive. We damaged you. We're the reason you can't maintain a relationship with your own family. Riley opened their mouth to respond, then closed it. Because there was truth in what their mother was saying, even if it was twisted. They had posted about toxic family dynamics. They had shared articles about emotional manipulation. They had found validation in online communities of people who understood what it felt like to love parents who seemed incapable of loving them back unconditionally. I was trying to understand, Riley said finally. I was in pain, and I was trying to figure out why. By airing our private business to the entire world? By processing my experiences in the way that helped me heal. Tom, who had been watching the exchange with laser focus, spoke up. Maybe the problem isn't that Riley posted about it. Maybe the problem is that they had something to post about. The statement hit the table like a grenade. David nearly choked on his wine. Jessica stared at her youngest brother as if he'd grown a second head. Maggie's face went through several colors before settling on a dangerous shade of red. Thomas Morrison, you watch your tone. My tone is fine, Tom said with the fearless clarity that only teenagers possess. But I've been watching this family for 16 years, and I can tell when something's messed up. Tom, David tried again, his peacemaking instincts kicking in. This is between Riley and your mother. No, it's not. Tom's voice carried a conviction that silenced the table. This affects all of us. The way you guys treat Riley affects how Jessica and I see ourselves. The way you make Riley feel like their choices are wrong makes us think our choices might be wrong too. Riley stared at their youngest sibling, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Tom had always been the quiet observer, the artistic one who preferred to fade into the background. But there was steel in his voice now, a strength that came from years of watching and analyzing and understanding. Tom's right, Riley said quietly. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry if my posts hurt you. That wasn't my intention. But I won't apologize for talking about my experiences or for seeking support when I needed it. Maggie's laugh was harsh and brittle. Your experiences. As if you're some kind of victim. As if we beat you or starved you or threw you out on the street. There are different kinds of harm, Riley said, drawing on months of therapy sessions. Not all abuse leaves bruises. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David's face went ashen. Jessica made a small sound of distress. Tom nodded grimly, as if Riley had finally named something he'd been observing for years. Abuse? Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a scream. You think we abused you? Riley met their mother's eyes, seeing the genuine confusion and pain there. It was the hardest part about their relationship. Maggie truly believed she was a good mother. She'd provided food, shelter, clothing, education. She'd driven them to school activities and helped with homework and attended parent-teacher conferences. By many external measures, she had been a good parent. But love, Riley had learned, wasn't just about what you provided. It was about how you made someone feel about themselves. I think you loved me the only way you knew how, Riley said carefully. But your love always came with conditions. Be successful. Be grateful. Be the person you wanted me to be. And when I couldn't be that person, when I chose a different path, the love disappeared. That's not true. It is true. The words came out stronger than Riley intended. When I told you I was majoring in social work instead of business, you stopped talking to me for 2 weeks. When I said I wanted to live off campus my senior year, you threatened to cut off financial support. When I told you I was happy, you told me happiness wasn't enough. David finally found his voice. We just wanted you to be secure, to have opportunities. You wanted me to want the same things you wanted, Riley corrected. And when I didn't, you made me feel like I was broken, like my dreams were worthless, like I was worthless. The silence that followed was different from the others. This one was filled with recognition, uncomfortable, painful recognition of truths that had been carefully avoided for years. Jessica spoke first, her voice barely audible. Is that why you stopped calling?" Riley turned to their sister, seeing the genuine confusion in her eyes. Jessica had always been the good one, the one who met expectations, who made their parents proud. She'd never experienced the subtle erosion of self-worth that came from consistently disappointing the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. "I stopped calling because every conversation became a lecture about my choices. Because Mom would ask about my life and then explain why I was doing it wrong. Because talking to you guys made me feel worse about myself, not better." "But we missed you," Jessica said, and there was such genuine pain in her voice that Riley felt their own eyes burn with tears they hadn't expected. "I missed you too," Riley admitted. "I missed all of you. But I couldn't keep letting myself be hurt, just to maintain a relationship." Tom leaned forward, his elbows on the table in a posture that would normally earn him a sharp rebuke from their mother. "So the posts, they helped?" Riley nodded. "They helped me realize I wasn't crazy, that other people had similar experiences, that wanting to be accepted for who you are isn't unreasonable." "But they also helped you build a case against us," Maggie said, her voice hollow now, drained of its earlier fire. "You found people who agreed that we were terrible parents. You found validation for thinking the worst of us." Riley considered this, recognizing another grain of truth wrapped in accusation. "Maybe. But I also found the strength to come back, here tonight. I found the courage to have this conversation instead of just disappearing forever." The admission seemed to catch everyone off guard, including Riley themselves. They hadn't consciously realized that their social media processing, their therapy, their carefully constructed support system had all been leading to this moment, not to permanent estrangement, but to the possibility of real conversation. "So what now?" David asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Where do we go from here?" Riley looked around the table, at their father's genuine bewilderment, their mother's defensive pain, Jessica's growing awareness, Tom's wise observation, at the remains of their peanut butter sandwich on its paper plate, surrounded by the elegant detritus of a family dinner gone wrong. "I don't know," Riley said honestly, "but I think we start by being honest about what's actually broken." The honest admission hung in the air like a challenge no one seemed ready to accept. Riley's call for transparency had created a fragile space where truth might be possible, but the family sat frozen in their familiar roles. David the mediator, Maggie the controller, Tom the observer, and Jessica. Jessica, who had been growing paler with each revelation, suddenly pushed back from the table with such force that her chair scraped against the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. "I can't," she started, then stopped, her hand pressed against her chest as if she couldn't catch her breath. "I can't do this anymore." The outburst was so unexpected, so completely contrary to Jessica's usual measured composure, that everyone turned to stare. Riley watched their sister's face cycle through emotions, panic, exhaustion, desperation, that seemed completely foreign on features they'd always associated with perfection. "Jessica?" David's voice carried the particular tone parents used when their children displayed behavior that didn't fit established patterns. "What's wrong, sweetheart? What's wrong?" Jessica's laugh was high and brittle, nothing like the controlled, pleasant sound she usually produced. What's wrong is that I've been sitting here listening to you all talk about toxic family dynamics and conditional love, and all I can think about is how I can't breathe half the time anymore. Maggie's maternal instincts kicked in, overriding her defensive anger. You can't breathe? Are you sick? Have you seen a doctor? I'm having panic attacks, Mom. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if Jessica had been holding them back so long they'd gained their own momentum. I've been having them for months, since the beginning of the semester. Sometimes I can't get out of bed. Sometimes I throw up before exams. Sometimes I sit in my car in the parking lot at school and can't make myself go to class because what if I mess up? What if I'm not perfect? The silence that followed was profound. Riley felt their heart clench, not with their own pain this time, but with recognition of their sister's suffering. They'd been so focused on their own family trauma that they'd missed the signs of Jessica's struggle. Panic attacks? David repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language. Why didn't you tell us? Maggie's voice was soft now, stripped of its earlier defensiveness. Jessica turned on her with eyes blazing. Because you would have seen it as failure. Because in this family, struggling means you're not trying hard enough. Because Riley left and you turned all your expectations on me, and I've been trying so hard to be everything they couldn't be that I'm losing my mind. The accusation hit Maggie like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, her face cycling through denial, recognition, and horror. That's not... We never... Maggie started, then stopped, her usual articulate control abandoning her. Yes, you did. Jessica's voice was gaining strength, as if years of suppressed truth were finally finding their way out. After Riley left, every conversation became about me. About my grades, my major, my future. About how proud you were that at least one of your children was making good choices. Do you know what that did to me? Riley watched their sister transform before their eyes. The composed pre-med student was dissolving, revealing the terrified young woman underneath. It was like watching someone shed an elaborate costume they'd been forced to wear for years. I never wanted to be pre-med, Jessica continued, her voice cracking. I wanted to study psychology. I wanted to understand people, help them with their problems. But you were so disappointed in Riley's impractical choice that I couldn't risk making another one. David's face had gone ashen. Jessica, if you don't want to be a doctor, it's too late. The words came out as a sob. I'm already 2 years in. I have scholarships based on my academic performance. I have professors who believe in me. I have a reputation as the responsible one, the successful one, the one who doesn't cause problems. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tom, who had been listening with growing intensity, spoke quietly. But you're miserable. Jessica turned to him with tears streaming down her face. I'm dying, Tom. I feel like I'm dying every single day. And the worst part is that everyone's so proud of me for it. Riley felt something crack open in their chest. Not their own pain this time, but empathy so profound it nearly knocked them over. They understood now why Jessica had seemed different tonight, why there had been stress lines around her eyes, why her perfect facade had felt more brittle than usual. Jess, Riley said softly, using the childhood nickname they hadn't spoken in years. Why didn't you call me? Jessica's laugh was wet with tears. Because you hate this family. Because you escaped, and I was supposed to be the one who stayed and made them proud. Because calling you would have meant admitting that you were right about everything. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Riley saw their sister clearly for the first time, not as the golden child who had it easy, but as another casualty of their parents' conditional love, just differently damaged. I don't hate this family, Riley said quietly. I hate what this family does to us. Maggie had been silent through Jessica's breakdown, her face a mask of growing horror as she confronted the reality of her parenting choices. Now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We just wanted you to be successful. Both of you. We wanted you to have security, opportunities, futures we never had. But whose definition of success? Riley asked, not unkindly. Yours or ours? The question seemed to break something in David. He set down his wine glass with shaking hands and looked at both his daughters. Really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years. "God," he said quietly, "what have we done to you both?" Jessica was crying freely now, years of suppressed emotion pouring out in ugly, honest sobs that bore no resemblance to the controlled tears she'd learned to produce when necessary. Riley stood without thinking and moved around the table, kneeling beside their sister's chair. "Hey," they said softly, taking Jessica's hands. "It's okay. You're okay." "I'm not okay," Jessica sobbed. "I'm so tired of pretending to be okay. I'm tired of being perfect. I'm tired of being everything you couldn't be." "You were never supposed to be me," Riley said firmly. "You were supposed to be you. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That my leaving made it harder for you to do that." Jessica looked up at them through her tears, seeing perhaps for the first time that Riley's departure hadn't been about escaping family responsibility, but about surviving family destruction. "I was so angry at you," Jessica whispered, "for leaving. Me alone with all their expectations." "I know," Riley said. "I was angry at you too, for making it look so easy." "It was never easy," Jessica said. "I just got better at hiding the cost." Across the table, Tom was watching his sisters with the careful attention he'd always paid to family dynamics. Now he spoke with the directness that seemed to be his particular gift. "So what if you changed majors?" he asked Jessica. "What if you did what you actually wanted to do?" Jessica turned to him with wonder, as if he'd suggested something revolutionary. "I can't. The scholarships, the expectations. Are those things worth your mental health?" Riley asked gently. "Worth panic attacks and not being able to breathe?" "But everyone would be so disappointed." "Everyone's disappointed anyway," Tom pointed out with brutal 16-year-old honesty. "You're miserable." Riley left. "I'm planning to leave too. Maybe the problem isn't that we're not meeting expectations. Maybe the problem is the expectations." The observation landed like a thunderbolt. Maggie made a small sound of distress. David's head dropped into his hands, and Jessica stared at her youngest brother, as if he'd just solved an equation she'd been struggling with for years. "You're planning to leave too?" David asked, his voice muffled by his hands. Tom shrugged with the casual fearlessness of someone who had watched his siblings pay the price for honesty and decided it was worth the cost. "I got into art school. Full scholarship. I've been planning to tell you after graduation, but honestly, after tonight, I don't see the point in waiting." The revelation was the final straw. Maggie put her face in her hands and began to cry. Not the controlled, ladylike tears she'd been taught were appropriate, but raw, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. "We lost them all," she said through her tears. "We lost all of them." Riley looked around the table at their family, really looked at them. Their father, overwhelmed by the recognition of his failures. Their mother, confronting the reality that her love had driven away the children she'd meant to protect. Jessica, finally honest about her pain. Tom, preparing to follow the path Riley had blazed toward freedom. For the first time since they'd sat down, Riley felt something other than defensive anger or hurt confusion. They felt something that might have been hope. "You haven't lost us," Riley said quietly. "But you have to decide if you want us as we actually are, or if you only want the versions of us that make you comfortable." The weight of Riley's words settled over the table like dust after an explosion. In the aftermath of Jessica's breakdown and Tom's revelation, the family sat surrounded by the wreckage of carefully maintained facades. David remained hunched over, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with what might have been silent sobs. Riley had never seen their father cry. David Morrison had always been the steady one, not warm, perhaps, but reliable. The provider, the man who worked late nights and weekends to maintain their middle-class lifestyle, who came home exhausted but never complained, who mediated family conflicts with tired diplomatic phrases that satisfied no one but kept the peace. Seeing him break down felt like watching a fundamental law of physics dissolve. "Dad?" Tom's voice was softer than Riley had heard it all evening, stripped of its earlier confrontational edge. David lifted his head slowly, revealing eyes red-rimmed with tears he was still trying to contain. When he looked around the table, his gaze lingered on each of his children, as if he was seeing them for the first time, or perhaps seeing them clearly for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and the words seemed to cost him everything. "I'm so sorry." Maggie reached for her husband's hand, her own tears still flowing freely. "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firmer now, finding strength in the decision to speak. "I've been sitting here listening to all of you, and I keep thinking about how I've failed every single one of you in different ways." He turned to Riley first. "You were brave enough to be yourself, and instead of supporting you, I let your mother make you feel like there was something wrong with who you were. I was proud of you. God, I was so proud of your independence and your conviction. But I was too much of a coward to say it." Riley felt their throat tighten. They'd spent years assuming their father simply didn't care, that his silence meant indifference rather than conflict avoidance. "You were proud of me?" The question came out smaller than they intended. David's laugh was bitter. "Proud and terrified and envious all at the same time. Do you know what I wanted to be when I was your age?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Riley shook their head. "A musician." David's smile was sad and distant. "I had a band in college. We weren't any good, but we played at local bars, wrote our own songs. I thought I was going to change the world with my guitar and my lyrics about social justice and authenticity." Riley stared at their father as if he'd just revealed he was secretly a superhero. David Morrison, middle manager and weekend lawn care enthusiast, had wanted to be a musician. "What happened?" Jessica asked, wiping her eyes but leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "Life happened. Responsibility happened. Your mother got pregnant with Riley, and suddenly I had a family to support. My parents, your grandparents, made it very clear that music wasn't a career, it was a hobby. That real men provided for their families through stable employment, not through dreams and foolish pursuits." He paused, looking down at his hands. "So, I got a business degree. I took an entry-level position at the insurance company. I put my guitar in the closet and told myself it was temporary, just until we got on our feet financially." "But you never went back to it," Tom observed. "No. By the time Riley was walking, I'd been promoted. We could afford a house, car payments, all the things that seemed important. And music started to feel like something from another life, something irresponsible." David's voice grew quieter, more introspective. "I told myself I was being mature, sacrificial. That providing security for my family was more important than chasing some adolescent fantasy. And for years, I believed that. I believed I'd made the right choice. Until Riley left," Riley said, understanding beginning to dawn. David nodded. "When you walked away from everything we'd built, the security, the opportunities, the path we'd laid out, part of me was horrified. But part of me—" He trailed off, struggling with the admission. "Part of you was envious," Riley finished. "Part of me was envious," he confirmed. "You had the courage to choose authenticity over security, to risk everything for the chance to be who you really were. And I realized I'd spent 25 years building a life that felt safe, but never felt like mine." The confession hung in the air like a sacred thing. Riley felt their understanding of their father reshaping itself completely. All those years of thinking he didn't care about their dreams, when really he was mourning his own abandoned aspirations. "Do you still play?" Tom asked quietly. David's laugh was embarrassed. "Sometimes, late at night when everyone's asleep. I'll take the guitar out to the garage and play the old songs. But I'm rusty. And I'm 51 years old with a mortgage and college tuition to pay." "Age doesn't disqualify you from music," Riley said. "Neither does responsibility." "Doesn't it?" David's question was genuine, seeking permission for something he'd denied himself for decades. "How do you tell your family that you want to risk everything for a dream you should have outgrown 20 years ago?" Riley looked at their father, really looked at him. They saw the weight he carried, the compromises he'd made, the dreams he'd buried in service to family stability. They also saw something else. Recognition. David understood why they'd left because he'd been living his own version of that same suffocation. You don't risk everything, Riley said carefully. You don't have to abandon responsibility to reclaim parts of yourself you've lost. But you also don't have to stay completely buried under other people's expectations of who you should be. Jessica, who had been listening with growing intensity, spoke up. Is that why you never stood up for Riley? Because supporting them would have meant confronting your own regrets? David flinched, as if she'd slapped him. Maybe. I think I was afraid that if I acknowledged Riley was right to follow their dreams, I'd have to face the fact that I'd given up mine. And it was easier to let Mom be the bad guy, Tom observed with his characteristic directness. It was easier to avoid the conflict entirely, David corrected, which made me complicit in hurting both of you. Riley, I should have supported your choices, even if they scared me. And Jessica. He turned to his middle child with obvious pain. I should have noticed you were struggling. I should have asked what you wanted instead of just assuming you wanted what we wanted for you. Jessica was crying again, but quietly this time. I wanted you to be proud of me. I am proud of you, David said firmly. But I want you to be proud of yourself too. And if that means changing majors, changing directions, risking the disapproval of people who think they know what's best for you, then maybe that's what you need to do. The words seemed to unlock something in Jessica's posture. She sat, up straighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying had suddenly shifted. What about the scholarships? The money you and Mom have invested in my education? David was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Money is just money, Jess. We can figure out the financial part. What we can't figure out is how to get back the years you spend being miserable in service to someone else's version of success. Riley felt something shifting in their chest. Not the familiar armor of defensive anger, but something warmer and more vulnerable. This man was not the distant, indifferent father they'd built their resentment around. This was someone who understood the cost of compromising yourself for security, who recognized the courage it took to choose authenticity over approval. I have something to show you, David said suddenly, standing from the table. All of you, wait here. He disappeared upstairs, leaving the 4 remaining family members in a silence that felt different from all the others that evening. This one was expectant rather than tense, filled with possibility rather than dread. Tom spoke first. Did you guys know about the music? Riley and Jessica both shook their heads. Their father's revelation had recontextualized years of interactions, explained his particular brand of distant sadness, his tendency to retreat rather than engage. It makes sense, though, Jessica said quietly. The way he always got that look, when we talked about career plans, like he was somewhere else entirely. David returned carrying a battered acoustic guitar case, the kind that had seen years of use. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, revealing an instrument that was clearly well-loved despite its long exile. I wrote this the week after Riley left home the first time, he said, settling the guitar on his lap with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. I hadn't touched this thing in months, but that night I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about courage and fear and the price of different kinds of choices. His fingers found the chords tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. When he began to sing, his voice was rough with disuse, but warm with emotion. I taught you to be safe. To choose the certain road never told you that safety can become its own heavy load. I gave you all my fears dressed up as wisdom and concern, but the bravest thing you did was what I never learned. Riley felt tears they hadn't expected burning behind their eyes. In the song, they heard their father's understanding, his regret, his recognition of their courage. They heard love that had been present all along but had gotten lost in translation, between fear and expression. When the song ended, the silence that followed was profound. David set the guitar aside and looked at his children. I want you all to know, he said quietly, that I would rather have you authentic and struggling than successful and empty. It's taken me too long to learn that lesson. But I've learned it now. The last notes of David's song seemed to hang in the air like a prayer, transforming the dining room into something sacred. Riley stared at their father, this man they thought they knew, trying to reconcile the corporate drone who worked 60-hour weeks with the artist who had just laid his soul bare through melody and words. But it was Maggie's reaction that drew everyone's attention. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap with the rigid precision of someone barely maintaining control. Her face had gone pale, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet they had to strain to hear it. 27 years, she whispered. You wrote that song 27 years ago, and never told me. David's face flushed. Maggie, 27 years I've been married to a man I didn't know. Her voice was gaining volume, but not in anger, in something that sounded more like grief. 27 years I've been the villain in this story, the controlling wife who crushed her husband's dreams and drove her children away. Riley felt the familiar urge to defend themselves, to point out that they'd never asked David to abandon his music, but something in their mother's posture stopped them. Maggie wasn't building toward rage or defensiveness. She was collapsing inward, like a building whose foundation had finally given way. You let me be the bad guy, Maggie continued, turning to David with tears streaming down her face. Every fight with the kids about their choices, every argument about practicality versus dreams, every moment they looked at me like I was the enemy. You let me carry that alone. That's not what I— Yes, it is. The words came out as a sob. You got to be the understanding parent in private while I was the pragmatic one in public. You got to keep your hands clean while I delivered all the hard truths about money and security and realistic expectations. Riley watched their mother's carefully maintained composure finally shatter completely. This wasn't the controlled emotion Maggie had always wielded like a weapon. This was raw, ugly, honest breakdown. The kind that came when someone finally stopped performing and started feeling. And the worst part, Maggie continued, her voice breaking, is that I believed I was protecting them. I believed someone had to be realistic. Someone had to think about the future. Someone had to worry about practical things while you got to be the dreamer. She turned to look at each of her children in turn, her face a mask of devastation. I became everything I hated about my own mother, everything I swore I'd never become. The admission hit the table like a physical blow. Riley had heard stories about their maternal grandmother, Eleanor Chen's relentless work ethic, her dismissal of anything that didn't contribute to survival and advancement, her belief that love was best expressed through sacrifice and achievement, rather than words or affection. Tell them about Nana, David said quietly, and there was something in his voice that suggested this conversation had been building for a long time. Tell them what you've never told them about your childhood. Maggie's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against the table, as if trying to anchor herself. My mother worked 3 jobs when I was growing up. 3 jobs, because my father left when I was 7 and there was no safety net, no backup plan, no family money to fall back on. Riley had known the basic outline of this story, but something in their mother's voice suggested there was more to it. We ate government cheese and food bank vegetables. I wore hand-me-downs from church donations. I watched my mother work herself nearly to death because the alternative was homelessness, and I swore that my children would never know that kind of fear. Maggie's voice cracked completely. I made security my religion. I made success my obsession. I turned practical thinking into a weapon because I was so terrified of ever being vulnerable again. Jessica reached across the table tentatively, covering her mother's hand with her own. Mom, we never knew things were that bad for you. Because I didn't want you to know. Maggie's response was fierce. I wanted you to take security for granted. I wanted you to have the luxury of choosing dreams over survival, because I never had that luxury. Riley felt something shifting in their understanding of their mother. The controlling behavior, the obsession with practical choices, the terror when her children chose paths that seemed economically uncertain. It all made horrible sense now. But somewhere along the way, Maggie continued, her voice growing quieter, I stopped protecting you from poverty and started protecting you from authenticity. I stopped being afraid you'd starve and started being afraid you'd disappoint me. The recognition in her voice was devastating. Riley saw their mother clearly for perhaps the first time, not as a monster or a manipulator, but as a frightened woman who had turned her own trauma into a cage for her children. The sandwich, tonight, Riley said quietly. What was that really about? Maggie laughed, but it was a broken sound. Petty cruelty dressed up as a lesson. I wanted you to remember what it felt like to have less than everyone else. I wanted you to feel ashamed of your choices. She paused, meeting Riley's eyes directly. I wanted you to hurt the way I hurt, when I saw those posts about toxic families and generational trauma. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Riley felt their anger and hurt shifting, not disappearing but transforming into something more complex. Understanding didn't equal forgiveness, but it created space for something other than pure resentment. Those posts weren't meant to hurt you, Riley said. They were meant to help me heal. I know that now, Maggie whispered. But in the moment, seeing my parenting reduced to psychological terminology, seeing myself described as toxic, it felt like confirmation that I'd failed at the only thing that mattered to me. Tom, who had been listening with his characteristic intensity, spoke up. Being a good mom? Maggie nodded, fresh tears starting. I wanted so desperately to be different from my mother. Better than my mother. I wanted to give you opportunities she could never give me. But I gave you my trauma instead. I gave you my fears disguised as wisdom. David reached for his wife's other hand, and for the first time all evening, the gesture looked like genuine partnership rather than one person rescuing another. You also gave them strength, Maggie. You gave them work ethic and determination, and the knowledge that they could survive anything. But I also gave them the belief that their worth was conditional on their achievements, Maggie said. I gave them the fear that love could be withdrawn if they disappointed me. Riley felt tears threatening again, but not from old hurt this time. From recognition of how much pain their mother had been carrying, how much she'd been struggling with her own demons while trying to raise children who felt secure and loved. There's something else, Maggie said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I haven't told any of you yet. The family leaned forward unconsciously, sensing the importance of whatever was coming. Nana has dementia, Maggie said, the words falling like stones into still water. She was diagnosed 6 months ago. Some days she doesn't remember who I am. Some days she thinks I'm still 7 years old and asks why I didn't come home after school. The revelation hit Riley like a physical blow. Their grandmother, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent Eleanor Chen, was losing her mind. Why didn't you tell us? Jessica asked, her voice small. Because I was afraid, Maggie admitted. Afraid of watching her disappear. Afraid of losing the only parent I had left. Afraid of becoming an orphan at 48. Riley understood now why their mother had been so focused on family legacy lately. Why the social media posts had hurt her so deeply. Watching her own mother slip away had made Maggie desperate to hold on to her children, even if her methods were driving them further away. But mostly, Maggie continued, I was afraid of becoming her, of forgetting my children the way she's forgetting me, of having all these years of trying to be a good mother just disappear. The fear in her voice was primal, universal. Riley had never thought about their mother as someone who could be vulnerable, who could be afraid of anything other than their children's poor choices. She calls every evening at 8, Maggie said. Has for years. Sometimes she remembers our conversation. Sometimes she forgets I have grandchildren. But last week she asked about you, Riley. She said, how is my smart grandchild doing? The one who helps people? She remembered you with love, even when everything else was confused. Riley felt something crack open in their chest. Their grandmother, despite her memory loss, despite all the family drama, remembered them with love. Pure, uncomplicated love. I've been so afraid, Maggie whispered. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of losing all of you. Afraid of admitting that everything I thought I was doing right was actually wrong. I've been holding on to control so tightly because it felt like the only thing keeping this family together. She looked around the table at her husband and children, seeing perhaps for the first time how much damage her grip had caused. But I was wrong, she said. Control isn't love, security isn't love. Love is what your father just showed us with that song. Love is what Jessica showed us by finally telling the truth about her struggles. Love is what Tom shows us by being brave enough to choose his own path. Love is what you showed us, Riley. By coming back here tonight, even after everything. Riley felt the last walls of their anger beginning to crumble. Not because their hurt wasn't valid, but because they could see their mother's humanity underneath all the dysfunction. "So, what do we do now?" Riley asked. "How do we fix this?" Maggie wiped her eyes with her napkin, and when she looked up, there was something different in her expression. Not the rigid control they'd always known, but something softer and more uncertain. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe not knowing is the beginning of learning to do it differently." The confession of Nana's dementia settled over the table like a shroud, making everyone acutely aware of time's relentless passage and the fragility of memory. In the aftermath of Maggie's breakdown, the family sat in a stunned silence that felt different from all the others, not tense or angry, but contemplative, sacred almost. Tom had been quiet through his mother's revelation, but Riley could see him processing everything with that particular intensity he brought to subjects that mattered. At 16, he possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes unsettled adults who expected teenagers to be self-absorbed and dramatic. Instead, Tom had spent his formative years as an anthropologist in his own home, studying the complex dynamics that shaped his family's interactions. Now he leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes moving from face to face before settling on the remnants of Riley's peanut butter sandwich. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been thinking deeply about fundamental questions. "I have something to say," he announced, and there was something in his tone that made everyone turn toward him with full attention. "I've been watching this family my whole life. Really watching. And I think I understand some things that maybe you guys don't see because you're too close to it." David shifted uncomfortably. "Tom, you don't need to." "Yeah, I do." Tom's interruption was gentle but firm. "Because in 2 years, I'm going to be gone. And Jessica's going to be gone. And Riley's already gone. And if we don't figure out how to actually change instead of just understanding why we're messed up, this family is going to keep breaking people." The directness of his words cut through the emotional exhaustion that had settled over the table. Riley felt a surge of pride mixed with concern for their youngest sibling. Tom was brave in a way that both admired and worried them. The kind of fearless honesty that could either heal or destroy, depending on how it was received. "You want to know what I've observed?" Tom continued, not waiting for permission. "Mom, you're terrified of being your mother, so you became her in different ways. Dad, you're so afraid of conflict that you've spent years enabling Mom's worst impulses instead of standing up for what you actually believe. Jessica, you've been so desperate to be perfect that you've made yourself sick, trying to be someone else's version of successful. And Riley..." He paused, looking directly at his oldest sibling. "Riley, you've been so hurt by this family that you've convinced yourself you don't need us at all. But you came back tonight, which means part of you still hopes we can figure it out." Riley felt exposed under their brother's perceptive gaze. They'd thought they'd come home from a position of strength, armed with therapy tools and healthy boundaries. But Tom was right. Underneath all the growth and independence, they still carried the hope that their family might somehow learn to love them as they actually were. "The thing is," Tom continued, "all of your coping strategies make sense individually, but together, they create this system where nobody can be honest about what they actually want or need." Maggie wiped her eyes with her napkin, looking at her youngest child as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "When did you become so wise?" Tom's smile was rueful. "When you have a front-row seat to family dysfunction for 16 years, you either get wise or you get damaged. I decided to get wise." He stood up from the table, moving to the sideboard where Maggie kept photo albums. Riley watched him pull out a thick album they recognized from childhood, the one filled with family pictures from before everything became complicated. "I want to show you something," Tom said, returning to the table and opening the album to a specific page. "This is from Riley's 8th birthday party." Riley leaned forward to look at the photograph, their breath catching slightly. They remembered, that day, one of the last times they could recall feeling completely happy and accepted in this house. In the picture, 8-year-old Riley sat at this same dining table, chocolate cake smeared on their face, surrounded by family members who were genuinely smiling. David was in the background with his guitar, mid-song. Maggie was laughing at something Riley had said. Jessica, barely 5, was attempting to blow out Riley's candles, and Tom was just a baby in David's arms. But even he looked content. "Look at Mom's face in this picture," Tom said quietly. "Look at Dad. Look at all of us. This is what this family looks like when we're not performing for each other." Riley studied their mother's expression in the photograph. Maggie looked genuinely joyful, unguarded in a way Riley hadn't seen in years. There was no calculation in her smile, no agenda behind her laughter. "I remember this day," Jessica said softly. "You insisted on having chocolate cake for breakfast because it was your birthday, and Mom actually let you do it." "I was horrified by the sugar content," Maggie admitted with a small laugh. "But you were so happy, and it seemed like such a small thing to make you feel special." "That's the thing," Tom said, pointing to the picture. "You all know how to love each other. You've just forgotten how to do it without conditions and expectations and fear getting in the way." Riley felt something shifting in their chest as they looked at the photo. Not the familiar armor of defensive cynicism, but something more vulnerable. A recognition that the love had always been there, just buried under years of miscommunication and unmet needs. "But Tom," David said carefully, "loving each other isn't the same as knowing how to be healthy together. We've hurt each other. There's damage that needs to be acknowledged." "I'm not saying we should pretend nothing happened," Tom replied. "I'm saying we should stop using past hurt as an excuse to keep hurting each other." He flipped through several more pages of the album, stopping at another picture. This one from Riley's high school graduation. In this photo, the family dynamics were clearly different. Maggie stood rigidly behind Riley, her smile forced and tense. David looked uncomfortable, caught between pride and disapproval. Riley themselves looked miserable despite the achievement, their body language screaming discomfort with the family expectations they were already beginning to reject. "This is what we look like when we're performing," Tom said. "When we're all trying to be what we think the others want instead of who we actually are." The contrast between the two photographs was stark and painful. Riley could see the evolution of their family's dysfunction captured in frozen moments, the gradual replacement of authentic connection with elaborate performance. "I've been keeping a secret too," Tom said, closing the album and meeting each family member's eyes in turn. "I've been accepted to 3 different art schools, full scholarships to all of them. I've known for months, but I kept waiting for the right time to tell you because I was afraid you'd react the way you did to Riley's choices." Maggie's face went through several emotions before settling on something that looked like determination mixed with resignation. "Which school do you want to attend?" Tom blinked, clearly having expected more resistance. "The Rhode Island School of Design. It's got the best program for what I want to study." "Then that's where you should go," David said firmly, surprising everyone including himself. "We'll figure out the logistics, but you should absolutely pursue your art." Riley watched their parents' faces, seeing the conscious effort they were making to respond differently than they had in the past. It wasn't easy. They could see Maggie fighting her instinct to lecture about practical considerations, see David struggling with his own fears about artistic careers, but they were trying. "There's something else," Tom continued. "I've been in contact with Riley this whole time. Text messages, phone calls, Instagram comments. I never stopped talking to them because I never believed they were the problem." The admission landed like a small bomb. Maggie's face went pale, and David looked stricken. "You what?" Maggie asked. "I stayed in touch with my sibling because they're my family," Tom said simply, "and because I could see that they were getting healthier away from here, which told me the problem wasn't with them." Riley felt tears burning behind their eyes. They'd known Tom had been secretly supportive, but hearing him state it so clearly, to their parents felt like a gift they hadn't known they needed. "Tom," Jessica said quietly, "why didn't you tell me? I thought Riley hated all of us." "Riley doesn't hate anybody," Tom replied. "Riley was protecting themselves. There's a difference." He turned to his oldest sibling with an expression that was both loving and challenging. "But here's the thing, Riley. You came back tonight, which means you want this family to work. So you have to decide if you're going to keep one foot out the door forever, or if you're going to trust that we might actually be capable of change." The challenge hung in the air between them. Riley realized their brother was right. They had come back with an escape plan already in place, ready to flee at the first sign of toxicity. But staying safe also meant staying disconnected, never fully investing in the possibility that their family might learn to love them better. And the rest of you, Tom continued, his gaze moving around the table, have to decide if you want Riley in your lives enough to do the actual work of changing, not just talking about it. Riley looked around the table at their family. Each of them imperfect, each of them carrying their own wounds, each of them capable of both tremendous love and significant harm. They thought about the 8-year-old in the photograph, surrounded by people who loved them unconditionally, and wondered if it was possible to find their way back to that kind of authentic connection. So what does the work look like? Riley asked quietly. What would actually changing mean? Tom smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was the carefree expression of a 16-year-old rather than the weary wisdom of someone forced to grow up too fast. I think it means we stop being afraid of disappointing each other, he said, and we start being curious about who we actually are when we're not performing. Tom's challenge settled over the table like a gauntlet thrown down in the center of their family's carefully constructed dysfunction. The weight of his words, the demand for actual change rather than just understanding, hung in the air as each family member grappled with what genuine transformation might require. Riley felt the familiar urge to retreat, to build walls and create distance before they could be hurt again. But there was something different about this moment. Something that made running feel like the wrong choice. Maybe it was Tom's unflinching honesty, or their father's song, or the raw vulnerability their mother had shown. Maybe it was simply that they were exhausted from carrying so much defensive armor. I need to make a phone call, Riley said suddenly, pushing back from the table. I need to process this with someone who can help me think clearly. Maggie's face tightened reflexively. You're going to call that therapist and tell her how terrible we are? No, Riley said, meeting their mother's eyes steadily. I'm going to call my best friend and tell them how complicated you are. There's a difference. The distinction seemed to catch Maggie off guard. She nodded slowly, as if recognizing that Riley's support system wasn't automatically an enemy of the family. Riley stepped onto the back porch, pulling out their phone with hands that were steadier than they expected. The evening air was cool against their skin, a relief after the emotional intensity of the dining room. They scrolled to Alex's number and hit call, knowing their friend would answer despite the late hour. Riley? Alex's voice came through, immediately, warm with concern. How's the family dinner from hell going? Despite everything, Riley found themselves smiling. It's not what I expected. Better or worse than the peanut butter sandwich scenario we planned for? Both. Riley sank into one of the porch chairs, trying to organize their thoughts. Alex, they're all falling apart in there, like actually falling apart, and I don't know what to do with that. Through the porch door, Riley could see their family still sitting around the table. Tom was speaking animatedly about something, gesturing with his hands. Jessica was leaning forward, engaged in a way Riley hadn't seen from her in years. David had his arm around Maggie's shoulders as she wiped her eyes. It looked almost normal, like a family working through problems instead of avoiding them. Tell me, Alex said simply, and Riley felt the familiar comfort of being heard without judgment. My mom served me a peanut butter sandwich while everyone else got steak, Riley began, then found themselves recounting the entire evening. Jessica's panic attacks, David's abandoned music career, Maggie's childhood trauma and Nana's dementia, Tom's secret art school plans and his challenge to the family. Alex listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding at key moments. When Riley finished, there was a pause before Alex spoke. Damn, Alex said finally. That's a lot. Too much, Riley agreed. I came here prepared for the usual guilt trips and passive aggression. I didn't come prepared for them to be human. Is that a bad thing? Riley considered the question. It's complicated. It's easier to maintain boundaries with people when you can keep them in villain boxes, when they're just flawed humans trying their best and failing. That's messier. But also more real, Alex pointed out. The question is, do you want to deal with them as real people, Or do you prefer the simplified version where you're the victim and they're the bad guys? The directness of the question stung, but Riley recognized it as the kind of loving challenge Alex had always offered. Their friend never let them stay stuck in comfortable narratives when growth was possible. I think I want to try the real version, Riley said slowly. But I'm scared. What if I open myself up to them and they hurt me again? What if this vulnerability is just temporary and they go back to their old patterns? What if they don't? Alex countered. What if this is actually the beginning of something healthier? Riley watched through the window as Tom showed their parents something on his phone. Probably his art portfolio, based on their expressions of wonder and pride. I don't know how to trust that possibility. You don't have to trust completely, Alex said. You just have to be willing to take it one step at a time. And you know what? If they do revert to old patterns, you've got the tools to handle that now. You're not the same person who left 2 years ago. The reminder was exactly what Riley needed to hear. They had changed, had grown, had built a life and support system that wasn't dependent on their family's approval. They could afford to take risks with these relationships because their entire sense of self wasn't tied up in the outcome. I love you, Riley said suddenly. Thank you for being my family when my family couldn't be. I love you too, Alex replied warmly. But Riley, they sound like they're trying to be your family now. Maybe consider letting them. After hanging up, Riley sat on the porch for several more minutes, breathing in the night air and watching their family through the window. They pulled up Dr. Kim's number and sent a quick text. Emergency session tomorrow. Family stuff got complicated in a good way, and I need help processing. The response came back quickly. Of course. 10 a.m. work. Proud of you for staying present through difficulty. Riley felt a surge of gratitude for the professional support that had made this evening possible. Without Dr. Kim's guidance over the past 2 years, they would never have developed the emotional tools to sit through their family's revelations without either fleeing or attacking. But now they faced a choice that therapy had prepared them for but couldn't make for them. Whether to risk genuine connection with people who had hurt them deeply, but who seemed genuinely committed to change. Standing up, Riley looked through the porch door one more time. Their family was still talking, still engaged with each other in a way that looked more authentic than anything they remembered from their childhood. Tom caught sight of them through the glass and waved them back inside with an expression that was pure little brother, impatient and loving and slightly bossy. Riley took a deep breath and opened the door. How's Alex? Jessica asked as Riley returned to their seat. Worried. About me, but supportive, Riley answered honestly. They always are. I'd like to meet them sometime, David said, surprising everyone. If that would be okay with you. Riley blinked. In all their years of struggle with their parents, David had never expressed interest in meeting their friends. You would? Of course. They're important to you, which makes them important to us. Or should, anyway. Maggie nodded, though Riley could see the effort it cost her. I think I owe Alex an apology. I've spent years resenting someone I've never met, because they were giving you the support I should have been providing. The admission was so unexpected that Riley felt their throat tighten. Mom, I know it's not enough, Maggie continued, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see how my jealousy of your other relationships made me impossible to have a relationship with. Riley looked around the table at their family, really looked at them. They saw David's genuine regret and newfound determination to be brave. They saw Maggie's painful recognition of her own patterns and her fragile hope for change. They saw Jessica's relief at finally being honest about her struggles. They saw Tom's quiet pride in having catalyzed this breakthrough. They also saw the peanut butter sandwich, still sitting on its paper plate, now somehow transformed from a symbol of rejection into a reminder of resilience. I want to try something, Riley said slowly. I want to establish some ground rules for how we move forward, boundaries that protect everyone, not just me. Okay, David said. What kind of boundaries? Riley had learned about this in therapy, the difference between walls that kept everyone out and boundaries that allowed connection while maintaining safety. First, no more passive-aggressive lessons. If you're upset with me, say so directly. If you disagree with my choices, we can discuss it, but you don't get to punish me for them. Maggie winced, but nodded. That's fair. Second, my relationships outside this family aren't a threat to my relationship with this family. Alex, my therapist, my chosen family, they're part of my support system, not competition for my loyalty. Understood, David said. Third, we all commit to family therapy. Together. Not just me going to figure out what's wrong with me, but all of us learning to communicate better. The suggestion made everyone shift uncomfortably, but Tom spoke up first. I think that's a really good idea. I agree, Jessica said quietly. I think we all need help figuring out how to be honest without being cruel. David and Maggie exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Finally, Maggie nodded. If that's what it takes to learn how to be a family again, then yes. And fourth, Riley continued, I need you to trust that I'm an adult who can make their own decisions. You can offer advice if I ask for it, but you have to accept that my choices might be different from what you would choose, and that doesn't make them wrong. That one's going to be hard for me, Maggie admitted, but I'll try. Riley felt something loosening in their chest, a tension they'd carried for so long they'd forgotten it was there. And I have a boundary for myself too. I commit to giving this family a real chance, not keeping one foot out the door, not assuming the worst. About your motives, not running at the first sign of conflict. The promise hung in the air between them, weighted with years of hurt and hope in equal measure. So what does that look like practically? Tom asked. How do we actually do this? Riley considered the question. I think it means I come home more often. Not because I have to, but because I want to be part of your lives. It means you visit me in my space, see how I live when I'm not performing for you. It means we have regular check-ins about how we're doing, not just pretending everything's fine until it explodes. What about holidays? Jessica asked tentatively. I know they've been difficult. Riley thought about the Christmas call that had ended in hurt feelings and slammed phones. New traditions, ones that work for all of us, not just the version of us that Mom thinks we should be. Maggie flinched slightly at the reference, but she didn't defend herself. Instead, she asked, What would that look like? I don't know. Yet, Riley admitted. But I think we figure it out together. Maybe Tom makes the menus since he's the only one of us who's actually creative in the kitchen. Maybe Dad plays music. Maybe we acknowledge that forced togetherness doesn't create connection, but chosen togetherness might. David smiled. I like that idea. As if summoned by the mention of music, David's phone buzzed with an evening alarm. It's 8 o'clock, he said, looking at Maggie. Nana's call time. Maggie's face immediately shifted to anxiety. I should take this privately. No, Riley said suddenly. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to talk to her. I'd like her to know I'm here. Maggie stared at them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She'd like that. She asks about you, you know, even when she's confused about everything else. David answered the phone and put it on speaker. Hi, Mom. It's David. David? Nana's voice came through clearly, though there was a slight confusion in her tone. Is it Sunday already? It's Thursday, Mom. Maggie's here, and we have a surprise. For you. Maggie. My good daughter. Are the children there? I keep forgetting if they're coming for dinner. Maggie's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, Mama. The children are here. Riley's here. Riley? Nana's voice brightened immediately. My smart grandchild. The one who helps people. Riley felt their throat close up. Even with dementia stealing her memories, their grandmother remembered them with love and pride. Hi, Nana, Riley said, their voice thick with emotion. Riley, you sound grown up. Are you still in school? Are you learning important things? I graduated, Nana. I'm a social worker now. I help families. Good. Good. Families need help. Sometimes, even good families. Especially good families, because they think they should know how to do everything perfectly. The observation was so lucid, so perfectly timed, that everyone around the table went still. In her moment of clarity, Nana had articulated something profound about their situation. Are you taking care of yourself, Riley? Nana continued. Are you eating enough? Your mother worried you were too thin. Riley looked at the remnants of their peanut butter sandwich, then at their family gathered around the table. I'm taking care of myself, Nana. And I think we're all learning to take better care of each other. That's good, Nana said with satisfaction. Family is the most important thing, but only if you do it right. Love without conditions, understand? Love without conditions. The line went quiet for a moment, and when Nana spoke again, her voice was distant. Who is this? Why are you calling so late? Maggie's face crumpled, but she kept her voice gentle. It's Maggie, Mama, your daughter. I love you. Oh. Maggie. Yes, I'm tired now. Good night. The call ended, leaving the family sitting in profound silence. Riley wiped tears from their cheeks, overwhelmed by their grandmother's wisdom even in the midst of losing herself. Love without conditions, Tom repeated quietly. She said what we've all been trying to figure out how to say. Riley looked around the table at their family. Imperfect, struggling, but present and trying. They thought about the 8-year-old, in the photograph, surrounded by unconditional love, and wondered if it was possible to find their way back to that place. I think, Riley said slowly, we might actually be able to do this. The profound silence that followed Nana's call seemed to hold the weight of generations. Her words, love without conditions, hung in the air like a benediction, a challenge, and a roadmap all at once. Riley wiped their eyes, still processing how their grandmother's brief moment of clarity had cut straight to the heart of everything they'd been struggling to articulate all evening. Maggie sat staring at the phone in David's hands, her face cycling through grief, love, and determination. She has these moments, she said quietly, where she's completely present, completely herself, and then she's gone again, sometimes for days. But when she's present, she's really present, Tom observed. Like, more present than most people ever are. Riley nodded, understanding what their brother meant. There had been something almost prophetic about Nana's timing, the way her wisdom had emerged exactly when the family needed to hear it most. Tell us about her, Riley said suddenly. Tell us about Nana before the dementia. I feel like I never really knew her story. Maggie's expression softened, shifting from grief to something that looked like reverence. She was extraordinary. Is extraordinary even now. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When she immigrated from Taiwan in 1972, she spoke almost no English. She was 26 years old with a 6-month-old baby, me, and a husband who abandoned us within a year. David reached for his wife's hand, offering silent support as she navigated the painful memory. She took any job she could find, Maggie continued. Cleaning offices at night, working in restaurant kitchens during the day, taking in sewing on weekends. She learned English by watching soap operas and reading children's books from the library. She was determined that I would have opportunities she never had. Riley began to understand the generational pattern more clearly, how Nana's fierce work ethic and emphasis on security had shaped Maggie's approach to parenting, how survival instincts had been passed down as love languages that got lost in translation. She sounds incredible, Jessica said softly. I wish I knew her better before. She's still there, Maggie said firmly. The person she was, the wisdom she accumulated. It's still there, just harder to access sometimes. But tonight proved that the most important parts of her haven't disappeared. Riley thought about their grandmother's words, about love without conditions. Do you think she was talking about her own parenting? Like, recognizing something she wished she'd done differently? Maggie considered this. Maybe. She was incredibly loving, but her love was always expressed through sacrifice and achievement. She showed she cared by working 3 jobs to pay for my piano lessons, not by sitting down and asking how I felt about things. Like mother, so like daughter, Tom said, not unkindly. Exactly like mother, like daughter, Maggie agreed. I swore I'd be different, more emotionally available, more communicative. But when it came down to it, I expressed love the only way I knew how. Through providing, through worrying, through trying to control outcomes so you'd all be safe and successful. Riley felt a deep sadness for the generations of women in their family who had equated love with sacrifice, security with control. But they also felt hope, because here they were, finally talking about these patterns instead of just repeating them. She asked to speak to you specifically, David pointed out. Even with her memory issues, she remembered you with love. That has to mean something. Riley felt tears threatening again. It means more than I can say. I was so afraid that the family drama had poisoned her opinion of me, too. Never, Maggie said with fierce conviction. Whatever else has happened between us, Nana has always seen you clearly. She talks about your compassion, your integrity, your courage to choose a difficult path, because it was the right one for you. The words hit Riley like a gift they hadn't known they needed. To be seen and valued by their grandmother, even in the midst of family conflict, felt like a form of validation that went deeper than any therapy session. Can I tell you something? Jessica said quietly, looking at Riley. When you left for college, Nana said something to me that I didn't understand at the time. Riley waited, sensing this was important. She said, Riley has old soul wisdom. Sometimes old souls have to leave their families to find themselves. But if the family is smart, they wait patiently for them to come home transformed. The words landed like a revelation. Riley stared at their sister, processing the idea that their grandmother had understood their departure not as rejection, but as necessary growth. She knew, Riley whispered. She knew I had to leave. She also knew you'd come back, Jessica continued. She said Riley would return when they were strong enough to love us despite our flaws, and when we were humble enough to receive that love. Riley looked around the table at their family, at their father's regretful hope, their mother's fragile determination, their siblings' growing courage. Maybe Nana had been right. Maybe this was exactly the right time. There's something else, Maggie said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small worn notebook. She's been keeping a journal even as her memory's gotten worse. Sometimes the entries don't make much sense. But sometimes... She opened to a bookmarked page. She wrote this last week. Maggie cleared her throat and began to read in her mother's words. Maggie is afraid. She thinks love means holding tight, but love means letting go. Riley knows this. Riley is teaching the family how to love better. I hope I live long enough to see them succeed. The words hit the table like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of emotion that touched everyone present. Riley felt the full weight of their grandmother's faith in them, her understanding of their role in the family's healing. She sees me as a teacher, Riley said wonderingly. Not as the problem child, but as someone who could help the family grow. Because that's what you are, Tom said simply. You've been showing us a different way to be for years. We just weren't ready to learn from you before. Riley felt something fundamental shifting in their understanding of their place in the family. They'd always seen themselves as the outsider, the disappointment, the one who couldn't fit the mold. But maybe their refusal to conform had been exactly what the family needed. A mirror that forced everyone to examine whether the mold itself was the problem. Can I read you something else? Maggie asked, flipping to another page in the journal. She wrote this the day after Christmas, after that phone call where She paused, clearly remembering the painful conversation. After I hung up on you. Riley tensed, not sure they wanted to hear their grandmother's reaction to that family low point. Called Riley today to wish happy holiday, Maggie read. Maggie was upset about phone call before. Told me Riley doesn't appreciate family. But Riley's voice when they said they missed us? That was real love. Real missing. Maggie doesn't hear the love anymore, only hears the rejection. Someone needs to help her listen better. Riley's breath caught. Even in the midst of her cognitive decline, Nana had heard the love in their voice that their own mother had missed. She was right, Maggie said, closing the journal carefully. I was so focused on what I thought was disrespect that I couldn't hear how much you missed us. I couldn't hear how much it cost you to keep trying to connect with us. The admission felt like another small healing, another step toward understanding. Riley realized that part of their journey back to this table had been learning to express love in ways their family could receive. But an equally important part was their family learning to recognize love even when it came in unfamiliar forms. "What else does she write about?" Tom asked, clearly fascinated by this window into their grandmother's inner world. Maggie smiled for the first time since the call. "All sorts of things. She writes about her childhood in Taiwan, about recipes. She wants to teach you girls about how proud she is of Tom's artistic talent. She writes about David's music and how she wishes he'd play more often." She looked at her husband fondly. "She's always seen you more clearly than I have." David's eyes misted. "I should visit her more often, play for her." "She'd love that," Maggie said. "Music is one of the things that brings her back to herself. Sometimes she'll forget my name, but remember every word to a song from her childhood." Riley thought about the power of music to transcend cognitive barriers, to reach parts of people that remained intact even when so much else was lost. "Dad, would you consider playing for all of us more often? Not just hiding in the garage, but actually sharing your music with the family?" David looked surprised by the request. "You'd want that?" "I think we all would," Jessica said. "Tonight was the first time I've ever heard you sing, and it was beautiful. I want to know that part of you." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Maybe we could have music nights. You could play, I could show you my latest drawings. We could just be creative together instead of always talking about practical stuff." Riley watched their father's face light up with possibility. "I'd like that. I'd really like that." The conversation was interrupted by Maggie's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. "It's from Nana's care facility. They said she's asking for her family, seems agitated about something." "Should we go see her?" Riley asked impulsively. "All of us?" Maggie looked surprised. "Tonight? It's almost 9 o'clock. "But she's asking for family," Riley pressed. "And we're all here, all together, maybe for the first time in years where we're actually getting along. Maybe she needs to see that we're okay." The suggestion hung in the air as everyone considered it. Riley realized they were asking for something significant. Not just a visit to their grandmother, but a public declaration that this family was choosing to be together, choosing to support each other. "The facility allows late visits for family emergencies," David said slowly. "If we explained the situation." "I think Riley's right," Tom said. "I think she needs to see that her advice worked, that we figured out how to love each other better." Jessica nodded. "And I want to thank her for seeing Riley clearly when the rest of us couldn't." Maggie looked around the table at her family, her husband with his newfound voice, her youngest son with his quiet wisdom, her middle daughter with her honest vulnerability, her eldest child with their hard-won strength. "She'd be so happy to see us like this," she said softly. "All of us together, actually talking to each other instead of just performing for each other." "Then let's go," Riley said, standing up from the table. "Let's show her that families can learn, can change, can choose love over fear." As they began gathering their things, Riley looked back at the dining room table one more time. The elegant place settings, the expensive steaks growing cold, the paper plate with its humble sandwich, all of it seemed to tell a story about the distance between appearance and reality, between what families look like from the outside and what they were actually experiencing on the inside. But now they were choosing reality over appearance, authentic connection over perfect presentation. They were choosing to be a family that could travel together to comfort an elderly woman whose wisdom had helped them find their way back to each other. "Before we go," Riley said, picking up the paper plate, "I want to keep this." Maggie looked confused. "The sandwich?" "The plate," Riley clarified, "as a reminder. Not of the hurt, but of the conversation it started. Of the moment we decided to stop pretending and start being real with each other." Riley folded the paper plate carefully and tucked it into their jacket pocket. It felt like carrying a piece of their family's turning point with them, a tangible symbol of the night everything changed. "Ready?" David asked, keys in hand. Riley looked around at their family, imperfect, complicated, but finally honest. "Ready," they said. As they headed toward the door together, Riley caught Tom's eye and smiled. Their youngest brother had been right about so many things tonight, but perhaps most importantly, he'd been right about this. They did know how to love each other. They just had to remember how to do it without all the conditions and expectations and fears getting in the way. Love without conditions. Nana's words followed them out into the night, a blessing and a challenge and a promise all at once. The drive to Sunset Manor felt both endless and far too short. Riley sat in the back seat, between Jessica and Tom, their family contained within the familiar space of David's SUV for the first time in years. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative. Each person processing the evening's revelations while anticipating what they might find when they reached Nana. Maggie navigated the phone call with the night supervisor, explaining the family emergency with a desperation that made Riley's chest tighten. She's asking for her family, and we're all here together for the first time in years. Please, it would mean everything to her and to us if we could see her tonight. The approval came with conditions, only 30 minutes, and only if Nana was lucid enough to enjoy the visit rather than be overwhelmed by it. As they pulled into the parking lot of the long-term care facility, Riley felt their stomach clench with anxiety. They hadn't seen their grandmother since before college. Hadn't been present for the gradual progression of her illness. What if she didn't remember them at all? She'll know you, Maggie said softly, as if reading their thoughts. Even when everything else is confused, she remembers love. The facility's lobby was dimly lit for evening hours, all muted colors, and careful comfort designed to soothe residents and families navigating the complexities of aging. A night nurse met them at the front desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who looked genuinely pleased to see them. Mrs. Chen has been asking for her family all evening, she explained as she led them down carpeted hallways lined with family photos and gentle artwork. She's been more agitated than usual, but also more lucid. Sometimes it's like she knows something important is happening, even when she can't articulate what. They paused outside room 247, and the nurse turned to them with gentle authority. She's having a good moment right now, but these visits can be overwhelming. If she starts to get confused or upset, we'll need to end the visit for her well-being. Riley nodded, their hand unconsciously moving to their jacket pocket where the folded paper plate rested. A talisman of the evening's transformation, a reminder of how much had changed in just a few hours. The nurse knocked softly and pushed open the door. Mrs. Chen, your family is here to see you. Nana's room was cozy and personal, filled with familiar furniture from her old apartment and photographs spanning decades of family history. She sat in a recliner by the window, wearing a soft lavender cardigan Riley remembered from childhood visits. When she looked up at them, her eyes were bright and alert, present in a way that immediately put everyone at ease. My family, she said simply, and the joy in her voice was unmistakable. You came. Maggie reached her first, kneeling beside the chair to take her mother's hands. Hi, Mama. We were all together for dinner, and we wanted to see you. Nana's gaze moved around the group, cataloging each face with careful attention. When her eyes landed on Riley, her smile became radiant. Riley, she said with absolute certainty, my brave grandchild, you look different, stronger. Riley felt tears threatening and moved closer to their grandmother's chair. Hi, Nana. I missed you. I missed you too, but I knew you'd come back when it was time. Nana reached out to touch Riley's face with the gentle reverence of someone storing a precious memory. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you happy? The questions were so fundamentally loving, so free of judgment or agenda, that Riley felt something break open in their chest. I'm learning to be happy, Nana. We all are. Nana's attention shifted to David, who was hanging back slightly, guitar, case in hand. David, you brought your music. Good. Music heals families. I learned that from my mother back in Taiwan. David looked surprised. You want me to play? Always. Music says what words cannot say. Play the song you wrote about courage. Riley watched their father's face cycle through amazement, gratitude, and determination. He opened the case and settled the guitar on his lap, and when he began to play, the song from dinner. His voice was steadier, more confident. I taught you to be safe, To choose the certain road never told you that safety can become its own heavy load. Nana closed her eyes and smiled, swaying slightly to the melody. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and looked directly at David. That's a song about parenting, she said with startling clarity. About learning to love children for who they are, not who we need them to be. The observation hit everyone like a gentle blow. David nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, ma'am, it is. Good. Children need to know they're loved for being themselves, not for being perfect. Nana's gaze moved to Jessica, who was standing quietly beside Tom. Jessica, you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? Jessica moved closer, clearly, surprised by her grandmother's perceptiveness. I've been having trouble sleeping, Nana. Anxiety about school. Ah. Nana reached for Jessica's hand. Anxiety is fear dressed up as perfectionism. What are you afraid of, granddaughter? The question was so direct, so compassionate, that Jessica answered without hesitation. I'm afraid of disappointing everyone. I'm afraid of not being smart enough, successful enough, perfect enough. Nana studied Jessica's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. Perfect is not real, Jessica. Perfect is pretending. Real is better than perfect, always. She turned to Tom next, her youngest grandson who was watching, the interactions with his characteristic careful attention. Tom, you're planning something. Something that scares your parents but excites you. Tom grinned, clearly delighted by his grandmother's insight. Art school, Nana. I got accepted to art school. Of course you did. You have artist's eyes. You see what others miss. Artists are important. They show the world new ways to see beauty. She looked pointedly at David and Maggie. Support the artist. Artists make the world better. Riley watched their parents' faces, seeing their commitment to different responses taking root in real time. This wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It was about small, consistent choices to see their children clearly and love them accordingly. Nana, Maggie said softly, do you remember what you told us on the phone tonight? About love, without conditions? Nana's expression grew distant for a moment, as if she was reaching through fog to grasp something important. Then her eyes sharpened again, focusing on her daughter with laser intensity. Love without conditions, she repeated slowly. Yes, that's the most important thing. The only thing, really. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I didn't always do that well. I loved you, Maggie, but my love came with expectations. Work hard. Be successful. Be safe. I thought that was protection. But sometimes protection becomes prison. Maggie's tears were flowing freely now. You did the best you could, Mama. We all did. Best we could, yes. But we can learn to do better. Nana's gaze moved around the room, landing on each family member in turn. Are you learning to do better? Riley found themselves answering for the group. Yes, Nana. We're learning to love each other without conditions. It's hard, but we're trying. Good. Hard things are usually the most important things. Nana settled back in her chair with visible satisfaction. I have been worried about this family. Watching from far away, seeing the hurt, not knowing how to help. But tonight you are all here together, and you look like family. Again. The simple observation carried the weight of benediction. Riley looked around the room at their parents and siblings, seeing them through their grandmother's eyes, not as the dysfunctional collection of individuals they'd been, but as a family choosing to heal together. There's something else, Riley said, pulling the folded paper plate from their pocket. Nana, tonight Mom served me a peanut butter sandwich while everyone else got steak. It was meant to hurt me, to teach me a lesson about gratitude and family loyalty. Nana's eyes sharpened, and she looked at her daughter with an expression that managed to be both understanding and reproachful. But instead of hurting me, Riley continued, it started a conversation. It made us all honest with each other for the first time in years, so I kept the plate as a reminder. Not of the hurt, but of the healing that came after. Riley unfolded the paper plate carefully, showing it to their grandmother. Sometimes the things that seem like rejection are actually invitations to something deeper. Nana studied the plain white plate with the same intensity she'd brought to examining her family members' faces. "Show me," she said simply. Riley looked confused. "Show you what?" "Show me how a family shares a meal when they love without conditions." The request was so unexpected, so practical and yet profound, that Riley felt momentarily lost. Then, understanding dawned, and they looked around the room at their family. "We don't have food here, Nana." Nana smiled with the mischievous expression Riley remembered from childhood visits. "We have imagination, and we have love. That's enough for any meal." Without fully understanding what they were doing, Riley placed the paper plate in the center of a small table near Nana's chair. Their family gathered around it as if it were set with the finest china and the most elaborate feast. "What are we sharing?" Tom asked, getting into the spirit of the exercise. "Whatever each person needs," Nana said. "David, what do you need from your family?" David considered the question seriously. "I need permission to be imperfect, to try new things, even if I might fail, to take up space with my music and my dreams." "Then that's what we're serving you," Nana said with satisfaction. "Jessica? I need freedom to change my mind, to disappoint people if that's what it takes to be authentic, to be loved even when I'm not perfect." "Served with love," Nana confirmed. "Tom? I need trust. Trust that I can make good decisions about my own life, even if they're different from what everyone expects." "The most nourishing dish of all," Nana agreed. "Maggie?" Maggie's voice was thick with emotion. "I need forgiveness. For the mistakes I've made, the love I've given with too many strings attached, the ways I've hurt my children while trying to protect them." "Forgiveness is always available in loving families," Nana said gently. "And Riley?" Riley looked around at their family gathered around the simple paper plate, each person offering what they needed most and ready to provide what others required. "I need to belong, to be part of this family without giving up who I am, to come home and be welcomed as myself, not as who you think I should be." "Then that's what this meal provides," Nana said with deep satisfaction. "Everything each person needs, served without conditions, received with gratitude." The exercise was simple and absurd and profoundly moving all at once. Riley felt something settling in their chest, not the defensive armor they'd worn for years, but something warmer and more sustainable, the possibility of belonging without sacrificing authenticity. "Now," Nana said, looking at each of them in turn, "you know what a real family meal looks like. Remember this feeling. Remember that the food doesn't matter, the plates don't matter, the performance doesn't matter. What matters is showing up for each other with open hearts." A soft knock at the door interrupted the moment. The night nurse peered in with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but visiting hours are ending. Mrs. Chen needs her rest." Riley felt a stab of panic. They just found their way back to each other, just experienced their grandmother's wisdom and blessing. How could they leave now? But Nana seemed completely at peace with the time limitation. "This was exactly what needed to happen," she said with calm certainty. "You came when I needed to see you together, and you're leaving knowing how to love each other better." She reached out to squeeze Riley's hand one more time. "Come back soon. But come back because you want to, not because you have to. And bring Alex next time. I want to meet the person who loved you when we forgot how." The promise felt natural, easy. "I will, Nana. I promise." "And David," she turned to her son-in-law, "bring your guitar every time. Music heals what words cannot reach." David nodded, carefully placing the instrument back in its case. "I will. Thank you for listening." As they prepared to leave, Nana caught Maggie's hand and held it firmly. "Remember, daughter, love without conditions. That's the only love worth giving or receiving." Maggie kissed her mother's forehead with infinite tenderness. "I'll remember, Mama. We all will." The drive home was quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of people processing profound experience rather than the tense quiet of unresolved conflict. Riley stared out the window at the suburban landscape they'd grown up in, seeing it with new eyes. These streets had witnessed their childhood struggles, their teenage rebellions, their adult departure and return. Now they were witnessing something else, the beginning of a different kind of family story. Back at the house, they gathered in the living room instead of the formal dining room, the atmosphere casual and intimate rather than performative. David kept his guitar out, occasionally picking out soft melodies as they talked. Maggie made tea for everyone, a simple gesture of care that felt profound in its ordinariness. "So what happens now?" Jessica asked, curled up in the corner of the couch. "How do we make sure this isn't just a temporary moment of clarity that disappears when real life kicks in again?" It was the question Riley had been thinking about during the drive home. The evening had been transformative, but transformation was only meaningful if it led to sustained change. "Family therapy," Riley said. "All of us together. Starting next week if possible." "I'll find someone," David promised. "Someone who specializes in family systems and communication." "And regular check-ins," Tom added. "Not just when there's a crisis, but ongoing conversations about how we're doing, what we need, what's working, and what isn't." "Monthly family dinners," Jessica suggested, "but different ones. Ones where we're all involved in planning and cooking and cleaning up. Ones where the goal is connection, not performance." Riley felt hope building in their chest. These weren't grand gestures or unrealistic promises. They were practical, sustainable changes that could actually be maintained over time. "And I want to bring Alex to meet everyone," Riley said. "And I want to visit you in your new apartment, Jess, when you get settled. And I want to come to your art school visits, Tom. I want to be part of your lives, not just show up for holidays and crises." Maggie was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I want to learn about your work, Riley. I want to understand what you do all day, why it matters to you, how it makes you feel. I've spent so much time judging your choices that I never bothered to really understand them." The offer felt like a gift Riley hadn't known they needed. "I'd love that, Mom. Really." As the evening wound down, they found themselves reluctant to separate, afraid that breaking the spell of togetherness might return them to their old patterns. But Riley realized that clinging to the moment was just another form of fear-based behavior. "I'm going to head back to my apartment," they announced, standing and stretching. "But I'll call tomorrow to check in, and I'll be back next weekend to help Tom with his portfolio preparation." The decision to leave while things were good felt like a healthy boundary rather than an escape. Riley was choosing to trust that the changes they'd experienced tonight were real and sustainable, not fragile things that required constant vigilance to maintain. Their family walked them to the door, and for the first time in years, the goodbye felt like a simple transition rather than a painful severance. Hugs were exchanged freely, plans were made, love was expressed without conditions or expectations. As Riley drove through the quiet suburban streets toward their own life, they thought about the paper plate still folded in their jacket pocket. Tomorrow they would unfold it and put it somewhere visible in their apartment. Not as a reminder of hurt, but as a symbol of the possibility that even the most painful family moments could become catalysts for healing if everyone was brave enough to stay present through the discomfort. Their phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "How did it go? Are you okay?" Riley smiled as they typed back, "Better than okay. We figured out how to love each other without conditions. Turns out Nana was right all along." The response came immediately. "I'm proud of you. Can't wait to hear everything." Riley realized that for the first time in years, they couldn't wait to share a family story that wasn't about dysfunction or disappointment, but about the hard-won possibility of healing. They couldn't wait to tell Alex about their father's music, their sister's courage, their brother's wisdom, their mother's vulnerability. They couldn't wait to bring their chosen family and biological family together, to show each group what the other had given them. Most of all, they couldn't wait to discover what kind of family they could become when love truly came without conditions, when each person was free to be authentic, imperfect, and real, and still know they belonged. The peanut butter sandwich had been meant as a punishment, a reminder of their outsider status. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most honest conversation their family had ever shared. Sometimes, Riley reflected as they pulled into their apartment complex, the things that seem designed to break us apart are actually opportunities to come together in entirely new ways. Love without conditions. It was harder than it sounded, but perhaps not as impossible as they'd once believed. And with their grandmother's wisdom guiding them, and their family's newfound commitment to growth supporting them, Riley was finally ready to find out what that kind of love might look like in practice. The story wasn't ending. It was beginning, and for the first time in years, Riley was excited to see what came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.